Good afternoon. It's always a bit hard being the last speaker on a day like today, especially on a Friday with beer o'clock looming, and I can see the desire in some of your eyes. Hopefully you can concentrate for a little bit longer. I would like to apologise, I haven't come up with a PowerPoint today. I struggled to see how I could convert the main points I want to make into a meaningful graph or diagram, and that didn't seem to stop some of my co-presenters. But I thought I'd just talk to the points I want to make instead. When I was considering how to address this topic, I decided that I wouldn't just come and give you my own personal views. I thought that it would be better if I actually went out into the business community and talked to some of my contacts and then asked them the question and came back and gave you some feedback, and that's pretty much what I did. In terms of my methodology, I approached a sizable number of business owners from within the Bay of Plenty and outside the Bay of Plenty, across a whole range of disciplines. I didn't sort of stick to any one particular sector. And in essence, I asked them, what does business need from local government? And it was a very interesting process. I must admit, I was quite surprised by some of the answers that were given, and I'll get into the specifics of that shortly. But first of all, I'd just like to give you a couple of high levels of observations. First of all, without fail, I got very similar answers from everyone I discussed things with. So there does appear to be a bit of a consensus out there within the business community as to what they want. Secondly, virtually none of the views that were expressed are the views that you commonly read in the newspaper, and certainly not what you read in the letters to the editor. Thirdly, all of the business people I spoke to had a very similar vision, and that was to create a sort of a more prosperous, more growth-conducive environment, a sort of a virtuous circle where the environment facilitates business. It's a better place to live, excuse me. So businesses are attracted to the locality to invest and work. That attracts better staff who are better remunerated, and you therefore have wealthier ratepayers who are happy to carry the burden of the city, and you have a stronger city and a stronger region. And it was pointed out to me that the landscape for business and labour has really changed in recent years. Businesses now are almost all completely mobile. They can pretty much base themselves where they want to, and that's nationally and to some extent internationally. Labour is even more mobile, and you only have to look at the dreaded statistics on how many Kiwis jump the ditch to Australia to see that. So in striving to create an environment that's healthy for business, we're competing not just on a national stage within the Bay of Plenty, we're actually competing on an international stage. And I think if you factor in what Natalie Jackson has told us today, which is that we're all dying off, it becomes an even more important scenario. Look, it follows from that a failure to create that growth-conducive environment is going to result in the wrong sort of mobility. People will leave town. You're not going to have those staff earning salaries and wages to pump into the community. So there's a real stark situation there about how do we create the sort of place within the Bay of Plenty that people really want to live. Last but not least, in terms of these common themes, all of the businesses I spoke to, all the business owners I spoke to, bar one, and there is always at least one, thought that local government had a very important role to play in creating the right environment for business. In essence, the business community does not think that the market is going to solve this problem. They actually need help from local authorities. So let's just get into a bit more of the nitty-gritty. What are the key components of what the private sector wants from local government? And this can be basically summarised under a number of headings. And we'll start off with what I regard as perhaps the most obvious and the most boring. And that is that business wants good levels of service for basic infrastructure and services. So there's nothing too earth-shattering in that. Businesses want roads, wastewater done properly. They want their problems fixed, whether that's potholes or something more substantial, and they expect local authorities to do that in an efficient way. Secondly, and I've already touched on this, businesses want vibrant and livable cities. And this really just comes back to this whole mobility concept. So, what are we talking about in this regard? Well, we're talking about places where, recreational areas are prioritised, so waterfronts, parks, lakefronts, cycleways, walkways, those sorts of things. Cities with civic pride, where beautification is a real priority. CBD rejuvenation is a very strong topic. So cities and towns with a heart, not cities with a ghost town at their centre, or the plethora of $2 shots that Bob Harvey was talking about. Soft infrastructure is very important. So arts and culture, and on the whole, business owners regard local authorities spending on these matters as an investment in the city or region and not as a cost. And that's because if they want to attract the sort of talent that they'd like to, that's what those people expect to have in the city. Support for events of a cultural and sporting nature is also very important. Not David Beckham and the Galaxy, but events which are tailored to the strengths of the particular region. And finally, under this sort of topic, the private sector sees local government as having an essential role in keeping their cities safe, and that's in terms of urban design and also from a point of view of maintenance of order. The next theme to come out of my discussions was all about amenities, basically. And in essence, business owners want a lot more of them. We're blessed in the Bay of Plenty with great beaches and lakes and rivers and all those natural resources. But luckily for New Zealand, and perhaps unfortunately for Bay of Plenty, so are a lot of other places in this country. So those things are just not enough to attract people to this region. So what do businesses want? Well, it depends where you're situated, but it's sort of the pools and parks, stadiums, sports facilities for either playing in or for going to watch sport, galleries, that sort of thing. And these amenities and facilities are basically viewed by businesses as things that make a city more vibrant and livable, and businesses see those as sort of a quid pro quo for coming into your town, spending their money and investing and creating growth. A number of individuals indicated that they wanted to see a sort of a pipeline approach taken, so that if they could see that a city or region was committed to improving and growing facilities over time, then they might put up with a bit more with what they've got now, because they know that there's going to be a constant improvement. And I think the other thing to draw from this is that business owners are not wanting this to be done half-heartedly. They want to see facilities and amenities that reflect the nature of their locality, and also that take into account, I should say, the growth that's likely to occur in this region. So they are thinking relatively big. I can almost feel the fear factor a little bit here about this sounding awfully expensive and how on earth could we do this, which leads me on to my next point, and that is that businesses don't really care about rates. And there's a bit of a caveat on this, and that's that businesses need comfort that their local authority is delivering core services efficiently and cost effectively. But if that is happening, they don't perceive current rating levels as expensive, and they are willing for rates to be increased if that will flow on into greater and better amenities and facilities. There was a suggestion from some people that we almost have a duty to get a bit tougher with our constituencies and actually let them try and get them to understand that we need to deal with the rating issue in order to provide better for our region. To ensure that rate increases, though, aren't just tipped into the general slush fund, if you like, there was some suggestion that if rating was to be used to fund more facilities and amenities for the region, then those rates should be tailored or tagged in some way for specific projects. I think it's well recognised that even if you play around with rates a little, you're not going to be able to afford to do everything that we need to do. and indeed local government can't be expected to foot the entire bill, and that is recognised within the business community. So another theme to come out of these discussions was that there's an essential role here for the local authorities to harness the resources of the private sector. And a distinction was drawn between some of the other regions that have been discussed today, such as Invercargill, where you might have a licensing trust which is generating money for these sorts of projects, or where there's been a long history of benevolence. Unfortunately, the Bay of Plenty is just really faced with slightly leaner pickings in this area. And added to that is the fact that we do have the prospect of greater population growth. So we have a bit of a double whammy going on. Fewer funds are available from those philanthropic sources, but a greater need and a growing need for amenities and facilities. So the solutions that are put forward to try and address this, first, let's really coordinate those funding entities that we are blessed to have and ensure that capital finds the right home. And I'm aware that this is already a sort of a movement that's starting to happen in the region, and that's fantastic. But local authorities are probably the one group that has the ability to have oversight of that and to have a real involvement and help it happen. Secondly, there is scope for corporates and businesses to really step up to the plate more and to provide more of their own funding to help fund facilities. And again, the role for local government here is one of facilitation, or perhaps that should be extraction, and really try and encourage more money to flow from the private sector. And I think Tauranga City's City Partners program is just a fantastic example of one way that you might be able to do that. But there's a lot more, I'm sure, that can be done. Thirdly, it was suggested that we really actively look for opportunities for private investment, not just into amenities themselves, but perhaps into other areas. So if a whole lot of money needs to be directed towards a roading project, is there a private-public partnership that can help fund that? Is it a road that could be tolled? And if those are acceptable solutions and they give rise to capital being redeployed, well, fantastic. Let's grab those opportunities. The private sector very much wants to see bold, long-term decision-making and vision from its local authorities. A comment I received was that local authorities have heaps of plans but little vision. Another business owner observed that maybe there is a vision, but I just couldn't find it. And to be perfectly honest, I don't think that's quite right. I think the local authorities in this room do have a vision, but what's clear is that vision is either not quite appealing to some of the business community or the message isn't getting through. There is a perception that at the political level, decision-making is not being driven by long-term considerations, but it's more by reaction to the issues of the day. So, businesses feel that councils are captured by what I'd call lightning rod issues. And if a small sort of vocal minority can make their views noisily known, then that will drown out the needs and interests of the rest of the community. So instead of this approach, the people I spoke to said they would like to see local government taking much more of a leadership role. They would like to see local authorities making bold decisions, and the perception is that perhaps sometimes it's easier to do nothing because you don't step on any toes that way. But the message is that, look, not every decision will be right, and that's accepted. But please don't shy away from being ambitious, because we really need to see some sort of inspired decision making. And in terms of bouquets rather than brickbats, some really good examples came out as to what were perceived as good strategic decisions. So a special mention was made of the Rangiuru Business Park, the Tech Arena, which is just over here somewhere, which is one of the most fantastic venues that Tauranga is so lucky to have, the Tech All-Terrain Park, the Rotorua International Stadium redevelopment. Those are just a few of the examples that were mentioned. One of the very interesting examples which was mentioned was the Dunedin's Forsyth Bar Stadium, and probably within the room here, a lot of people, quite rightly so, would regard that as a complete cock case from a funding point of view. But what was interesting is a number of people said to me that, to be perfectly honest, we'd grapple with that problem if we could have a stadium of that quality on our doorstep. So I just think that gives you a bit of a flavour for the feeling out there. Getting down to the really boring stuff, businesses want active support for business and business development, and businesses on the whole do believe that local authorities have an important role to play in economic development, particularly from a point of view of facilitation, business attraction, and in particular, once there's one type of high-level business in a town, can we build a cluster or a centre of excellence around that? Because that's the sort of thing which really drives high-paid jobs, investment, and wealth for a community. Businesses want to know that if they come up with a good idea and are willing to bankroll it, that the local government in their neighbourhood will support it. So they want to know that local authorities are creating pathways for business development rather than putting up hurdles. Business owners would like local authorities to think and act a bit more like business. There was, the usual grumbling about how long it takes to get a decision out of councils, but I think in reality there is an issue here in terms of a genuine disconnect between how local authorities talk to business and vice versa. And I think the question from the table down here about how local authorities talk to iwi, touched a similar vein. And I'd make a couple of comments, and the first is, I thought Bob Harvey's anecdote about how Aucklanders lack passion because you can put on tea and bickies and put out 100 shares and no one will come was quite a classic. Putting out 100 shares in tea and bickies isn't going to drag a big business crowd. And I think businesses really don't understand local authority processes. They find the annual planning process or the long-term planning process just mind-numbingly boring and very, very slow. And they struggle to engage, partly, I think, because of that regulatory framework. So irrespective of that, we have to find some way to extend beyond that and actually get local authorities talking with all groups in the community, including business and including iwi, so that we can actually get the right messages through to Town Hall. Last but not least, there are some genuine questions in the business community about whether we need a better representation model, and I think there are some genuine questions here. Just as with central government, it appears that the 3-year election cycle can encourage short-term thinking, and the old saying that Rome wasn't built in a day applies to all of our cities and towns. Is it healthy to chunk decision-making down into 3-year units when you actually think about how long it takes to build a great city? That does seem to be counterproductive in some way. Secondly, for many councils, being a councillor now is virtually a full-time role, and I ask you whether that actually encourages diversity of representation. There are not a lot of people in the community who could actually manage a councillor role and do something else. The business community is a great example of that. Most business owners spend well over 40 hours a week within their businesses, having to step outside and then turn up to council for a similar commitment. It's just not doable. I'm not quite sure what the solution is there, but a couple of people were putting forward more of a pure governance model, a bit like a board of directors, so that rather than the current levels of commitment, maybe it's a 2 to 4 day a month commitment dealing solely with strategy and dropping the rest of that stuff down to the staff of the local authorities. Just in closing, I suppose I'd like just to make the observation that it's one thing for business to lay out its expectations for local government, but perhaps local government, if it can talk to business properly, could lay out its expectations for business also. I think everyone in the community really has a duty to get a bit more involved in local democracy. The voice of business is only one of the voices that really needs to be heard a little louder. So I think that's the challenge that's before us. And that's pretty much all I wanted to say, so thank you very much for your time. That's great. Cheers.
Any questions for Paul? What does that mean? Ah, there's one down the back. Microphone, Peter.
Paul,
No, you're on.
did you detect any real interest, the people you spoke with, of actually joining in and helping make this happen? I think, for example, with the regulatory issues you were talking about, there's quite a good case for saying, well, let's have an advisory board of the people who are the end users so they can actually help the council understand how better to do the job.
There weren't a lot of hands going up, but there was, for example, Priority 1, I'm sure most of you are aware of what Priority 1 is about, and that was regarded as being one excellent interface between local authorities and business. But look, Peter, I think some forum which is a little bit less time intensive, it would be an ideal way to get a bit more of a voice from business. Yeah.
Anyone else? Please, over here. Where's the microphone? We're making a walk from one side of the room to the other. Oh, I see, it's a relay.
I think the spotters need to wear flat shoes.
Thank you, Paul. I'd just like to ask you, with the senior business leaders within the Tauranga community, you think that they could be taking a higher role, but that they haven't got the time with running their businesses. Would you see that if there were CCOs established for certain functions, that they might find the time to be involved with those?
I think definitely people in the business community are willing to take up the CCO directorship role, because I think that is that true governance role where you are at a strategic governance level. You're not down at the operational level, and it's quantifiable commitment. So I don't think there's a problem with that. I think the problem is that when it comes to the council itself, it is a very high level of commitment.
Thank you. Anything else? Please, one here. Thanks, Adrian.
Paul, thank you. That was a very elegant and insightful delivery. And it would be nice to have a record of that, because you've collected up a really good range of views. Just following on the theme of the other questions about participation by business, you actually mentioned who writes the letters to the paper. And one of the just using an example of the museum project, for example, which would fit very well into your wish list from business in terms of local amenities. We never saw letters from the business community. I kind of tracked it, and I don't remember ever seeing a business leader in Tauranga putting forward a view that, and I just wonder whether there's another barrier which has to do with sticking your neck out and maybe getting your head chopped off. Did that come through?
Yeah, I didn't actually get many. I don't think there's much fear out there of getting the head chopped off. I just think letters of the editor are not really relevant to much of the community. I think it's a very small part of the world that bothers doing that or reading them.
Anyone else? Paul, a thank you from the organisers of the conference. Right.